All right, so we have two awesome talks for today. We're going to start off with Josh, and he's going to talk to us about UCLA Library Systems, and then part two is Uzi, and he's going to talk to us about AWS's Amplify. So I'm going to just kind of let Josh kick it off. Go ahead and introduce yourself, and anyway, welcome everybody. Really glad to have everybody here.
Thanks. All right, I'm going to share my screen.
Are you recording, Kobe?
Yeah. We are. Thank you. But good reminder.
All right, can you see my presentation here? All right, so a little about me. I'm the head of software dev at the UCLA Library. I've been doing this a while. I started working in libraries when I was a senior in high school. And then I just kept working in libraries through college and then after college. And then at some point I got into the tech side and just started taking computer science classes, got a master's degree and became a dev. So I've been doing that for 15 years. I recently joined UCLA about 2 years ago. This talk tonight is kind of an inverse of the normal meetup talk. So what I'm going to do is tell you about where my team is right now and what we want to do, but none of us are experts in Vue. So then I'm going to ask you all questions and see if you can answer them rather than the other way around. So a little about my team. We've got 16 people, 12 devs, 3 ops plus me. We do have one vacant position I was hoping to fill with a Vue.js expert in April, and then COVID hit, budget crunch, my position is frozen. So I don't know what to do about that right now. So we're trying to teach ourselves and become experts, right? But over the past 2 years, we've been trying to modernize mostly around process. So we created a UX team so that the stuff we build is actually based off user research and we're actually building the right thing. We've adopted agile processes, DevOps methods. You know, each team can do its own work. It doesn't need to rely on anybody else. It has ops and devs on the same team. Adopted some CI pipeline stuff, and then we dedicate Fridays to learning so everybody can level up their skills. So now that we've kind of adopted those processes, now we're trying to look at, okay, can we modernize our actual tech stack? Because we were dealing with almost 20 years worth of application development that has not moved. Like all those things are still running. They were never actually turned off to be or replaced. So the portfolio has just mushroomed and we need to start consolidating, right? So some of those things are these kind of like bigger platforms for the digital collections at the library. There's this thing called DLCS that was built in-house about 15 years ago. It's on a Java framework called JRun, which I wasn't even aware of till I started working here. At some point in time, that started to show some limitations. So the library adopted this other open source platform called Islandora, which is based off of Drupal. But instead of talking to a normal database, it talks to this very obscure NoSQL thing that I don't know if any of you are familiar with semantic web or linked data, but they store data in something called triples. And so this thing's a triple store. It's very obscure. That thing started to show limitations. So then we adopted this other open source project, which is on the same stack, but instead of Drupal, it's Rails. And so that's what's powering our current digital library. Now, in addition to those big platforms, there's a bunch of these boutique applications built for just a single collection. And we've got this smattering of tech stacks. So again, JRun, we've got some JSP, we've got one built in Drupal, another one in Angular, one in this open source thing called Blacklight, which is a Rails app, a more recent one built in React. And this is just a sample, right? There are many more. So we've got this broad range of tech stacks in our portfolio. And then that's just the digital collection stuff. Then there's the actual website for the library, which is a Drupal 7 instance. However, when I took the job, there were no more Drupal devs on the team. So we've got this website with no one really capable of, doing much with it. And then last year, the Film and Television Archive, which used to be part of the School of Film and Television, was brought under the library instead. And so they got a giant collection of film. They've got their own website. So we need to figure out how to merge our content. So we've got a redesign project. We did some research a few months ago. We're in the process of picking a new headless CMS, and we should be closing a contract with the design firm, I hope this week, but probably next week, so that they can deliver to us a design system probably in about 4 months. And then we'll start building it and hope to deliver it by next school year. I realize to those of you who work in industry, this sounds like a snail's pace to take a year to build something, but in the land of government and bureaucracy, this is actually pretty good timing. In addition to all that, we've got other vendor systems we support, like the catalog, which you can see here. And we're currently shifting to a UCY thing. And this doesn't include just the books. This is like all those journal articles. We're talking millions of journal articles, right? Are indexed in this thing. And then we got these other vendor applications we integrate with. So all of that, right, is what we're having to support. And so the goal here is, all right, let's shift, right? Let's turn off all that stuff, but also do it in a way that doesn't put us in that same position 10 years from now. So let's adopt something that's evolutionary that we can change over time. Try to be microservice-y, but some of the things we're dealing with are very monolithic. So, but we can at least, put API in front of everything and separate at least the front and back end, right? But the real goal here is to provide just one interface for everything at the library, all our services, all our collections, just pull from all these different repositories into one unified interface. So our students and faculty don't have to search for the right search interface. Sounds very basic, right? But this is not the way libraries operate. They tend to have platforms and interfaces for like a whole myriad of services. So the ballpark plan here is, all right, this year being year one, let's adopt a headless CMS, rebuild just the Drupal part of our web presence, the main website, with Vue.js and a static site generator. Once that's up and running, all right, now let's start adding content and features from all those boutique and legacy platforms into that same site and iterate. Just keep doing that until they're all turned off. And eventually we get down to just the one user interface. So how do I do that? So that's why I'm coming to talk to you all. Doing this type of headless CMS and static site generated site is very different from what my team has been doing for the past 15 years, which is building like these server-side dynamic sites. So I feel like, and without that lead developer I was hoping to hire, right, I feel like there are some potential quagmires we might jump into without a little more knowledge. And so I'm looking to you, the community that has already been doing this, to kind of educate us. Like, what are the gotchas that we need to know about around, using a design system, something we haven't done before, headless CMS, Vue.js itself, static site generators, Webpack and other bundling and pipeline tools, like all the stuff that you guys are doing right now. What are the things that you wish you knew before you jumped in? And I know that some people talk about, adopting Vue incrementally, just add a few components here, but that's not what we're doing. Like, we're going to throw that whole Drupal thing away and rebuild it from scratch. So it's kind of a greenfield project, which I think is a little different from just jumping into Vue a little piece at a time. So that's it for my slides. And now I've got a whole list of questions, about 15 to 20. that I'm hoping to go through, and I'm hoping the other newbies that are also attending will throw in their own questions and keep the discussion going. All right, so any questions from you all before I jump into my own Q&A? Do you guys want any more around our context or anything about our team?
Just out of curiosity, so like you've decided on Vue, have you made decisions on like an additional framework on top of that, Nuxt or
Right, so
Gridsome?
yeah, so that's essentially the choice right there, is Nuxt versus Gridsome. I really like Gridsome, but Nuxt definitely has the bigger following. So, you know, as a manager, I tend to be a little more conservative, I guess. I like adopting things that have a bigger following, just because I know that there will be longer term support.
What are the advantages of Gridsome? Like what is its main value prop?
Well, so this is a good question, because some of the things that I think are cool about it compared to Nuxt might be because I'm too ignorant of Nuxt, right? So I'm coming in as a noob. So one of the things I liked about when I looked at it was that it generates both the static HTML and the JSON for every page, right? So that when a user comes in, the first hit, they get the static HTML, but from that point on, the Vue takes over and it just pulls the JSON, right? So that you get like the spa feel, but everything's super fast, like a fully static site. And I'm not sure if Nuxt operates in the same way or if it's just generating a bunch of HTML snippets.
Yeah, I guess to address that, both Nuxt is capable of doing that. Like
Okay.
there's a couple of ways that Nuxt operates. So Nuxt can operate in a universal mode. So that's like you can run it on a node server, and it'll server-side generate pages for you. You can also run it as an SPA only. So you just got an index.html and only runs through that. But I imagine your situation with a library, you probably want to optimize on like search engine optimization, and like being able to find individual pages is probably pretty important.
Yeah.
And load time is always important. So yeah, I think like definitely you want that the statically generated pages for as many pages as you can possibly crank out.
Right.
Yeah, Nuxt is perfectly capable of doing that. You just need to run it in like there's a specific build command, I think it's Nuxt export or something like that, but it'll do that for you.
Just generate.
Generate, yeah, Nuxt generate. That's all right. So like you set it up and you forget about it, but yeah, so like it'll do that for you. There's a couple of gotchas in there, in that like for dynamic things. So like book/title slug. Like title slug would be dynamic, right? You would need some way to tell Nuxt pretty much every possible title that you'd want to pre-generate. So usually that's just like an API hit of like, here's all of our things.
We have so much stuff that there's no way we're going to statically generate a page for every resource.
Sure,
like,
yeah.
You're talking many millions of things.
Yeah.
So we would statically generate all the informational pages, like all our services and stuff like that. But then when it came to people searching for resources, that would be, we'd be hitting our search engine and rendering the results dynamically.
Yeah. I'm millions of stuff is certainly a lot. Like we could probably do like thousands, maybe 10,000 pages. But you get beyond that, it's a lot to pre-generate for sure. So that's that. The biggest difference I'd say between Nuxt and Gridsome is Gridsome, Nuxt does universal rendering and is kind of specialized for apps. Gridsome specializes more in static rendering and has a GraphQL interface. So that's slight difference. They're both capable of doing what you're looking for. And I actually haven't built anything in Gridsome, but I've built plenty of stuff in Nuxt, and wish that I could build stuff in Gridsome. I just didn't have any GraphQLs to back it up, or GraphQL backends to back it up.
I'd moved my site over to a combination of Gridsome and Drupal last year. So what I do is I write my content in Drupal, and then I have an export button to basically generate a static site built using Gridsome. And so, yeah, I use the GraphQL capabilities to build out some of the more specialized pages and things like that are part of it. And what I would say is the one big advantage you'd have with going with Gridsome is that there's a Drupal plugin for it already. Like it can integrate into a Drupal site, and it kind of brings all of those node aliases and content and files and all that stuff. It just works. It's stupid easy, basically.
Okay, so that's interesting because
But the one thing is, it's for Drupal 8. I don't know if your sites are on Drupal 7 and earlier.
Well,
so you might need to build out some of this stuff, but it might also just be a matter of installing a couple of modules, and it might get you like 90% of the way there.
Yeah. So we are on Drupal 7, but that entire site is being thrown away. Right, we're going to rebuild it. And so we're looking at different CMSs. We looked at Contentful. They're a little pricey, so we're looking at Prismic instead. But we're also looking at Drupal 9 rather than 8.
Yeah, so anything that's in the Gridsome plugin for Drupal will work with Drupal 9 too. So there's another plus there for that. But like John said, like Nuxt is more powerful. Like Gridsome is just for static sites. And then you can have additional things that you can, make dynamic and stuff on top of it. But its core goal is to replace something like Jekyll and Hugo and stuff like that. So, yeah. But I'm a core maintainer on Gridsome. So that's why you can ask me questions if you want on that stuff.
Very interesting.
Were you involved with the plugin?
I was involved with the Drupal plugin for Gridsome. So, yeah.
Now, when you say it's specialized for static, so we could build a static site, but still, create a dynamic piece for search.
Yep.
Yeah. So
because you're just creating a view component then that can hit your API and stuff afterwards. But the core idea is like it's going to suck all of the content that's in Drupal, and or whatever content you want it to suck in from Drupal into static pages.
And I think that's essentially what we want, is to take the CMS and just make it all static. And then the dynamic part of our app would just be the searching for resources.
Okay.
Cool.
And did you have any SEO requirements on, like, I guess, the search results? Or it's okay that...
No, we would want SEO on the static pages, but not on
search. Gotcha.
not on like individual books or digital objects or anything.
Gotcha.
I mean, maybe someday, but that's like a future thing. I'm not going to worry about right now.
Okay.
But
I would have said, like, if that was a requirement, you would probably have to opt into like a universal mode type of server-side rendering, to not generate a billion pages.
Yeah. Now, generally what we do is we generate a sitemap for all the individual things and make that, and then like if Google wants to harvest that, they can.
But on the same front, I know that there's actually a Drupal camp happening in the next few days, and there's going to be a talk from, I think, Virginia with Veterans Affairs Office about having a Drupal site that moves over into or turns into a static site. I don't know if they're using Nuxt or Gridsome, but they were going to do a talk on that in the next few days, which you might be interested in. If they're doing it, then you might be interested in looking at that.
Send me a link.
Okay, and I'll post, if I find it, then I'll post it in the Slack group as well.
This discussion was billed as Vue, right?
Yeah.
Are you guys all using Drupal?
No.
No, I doubt it. I assume it's just my team and Ashok, because he's also worked at universities or on education.
It just happened to be that UCLA is using Drupal, is going to be using Drupal now, and Ashok used to be a maintainer at Drupal, so they're having that conversation in the back end.
Okay.
And there's no guarantee that we'll be using Drupal in the future. We might go with something like Prismic or Strapi instead.
Yeah, I guess that was one question I was just gonna have. Like, since you're creating a static site and stuff, like, are you still going to continue using the CMS and then have it just render stuff out, or like what are you gaining from that with keeping Drupal around, or then eventually throwing away, and then what you're going to do with it?
Yeah.
Kind of
So
yeah.
if we kept Drupal, it would just be headless. I guess the advantage there is familiarity and the potential for central campus IT to host it, because they're a Drupal shop. But or we could just pay Prismic to, that's easy too. So
kind of in line with Joseph's question, in terms of the CMS, is there anything that people should think about that might be more useful to play with Vue? Like, is there any particular thing you should be? I mean, there's a number of different CMS options out there. That Josh is of course just mentioning a few of them, but are there other ones you guys think?
I thought Vue was a component library. I've never used
Vue has components in it. It's similar to React. I mean, it's basically the same thing as React, but React is not necessarily exclusively UI. It is the front end, but it doesn't necessarily, when you say UI library, to me, that means it has a specific look and feel, and neither of them do, right?
Oh, I thought it was just like I could type import navbar or something, navbar 3, and it would just like give me a navbar that was really well designed.
So
I didn't know.
people are designing components that can do that kind of stuff for you, but a lot of people are building like full-fledged applications using Vue and React. So like their whole front end is all this, like they're treating the front end like an MVC framework. They're building stuff in it, and then it's talking to some back end to do stuff. And yeah, so people are doing some wild stuff with it.
Okay.
So to
give an idea.
To give you a little more color, the way that I think you're hearing it is that there are front-end CSS frameworks a la Bootstrap or Material Design from Google, and those are often integrated inside of either Vue or React, and that's the part that you're actually seeing is like, hey, this looks to me like a component, like a navbar. But those are CSS frameworks that are being used or kind of baked into the front end framework, which is a little more, it's like the entire front end, which I can't get into all the detail, but it encompasses much more than just what you're seeing. Okay. I hope that's helpful.
Okay.
All right. So we went straight into some of the technical stuff. I wanted to back up because I was going to start with some higher level questions. We'll see if this is a mental break or not. But what concepts does my team need to unlearn when moving from a history of dynamic server-side frameworks into this new world of front-end frameworks and static sites and all this? Like, what are some big concepts we need to like completely unlearn?
So I think the biggest parallel that you can find that is most appropriate for how to design something like this is think about actually like building an iPhone app, like a native app, in that your whatever your data is coming from is separate from your view layer, right? So there's no, you want like all the old like putting dynamic stuff into your template, just assume that there's going to be some asynchronous step where you have to wait for stuff to come in first before the page can, before a component can render. So like that's the biggest thing, is just the really understanding how asynchronous calls work and how to manage that.
I would add in that, like, in regards to like the API talk right there, think like breaking away from like MVC as like the way of just handling APIs. and actually making like very succinct contracts for like what the data is supposed to be, that the client can like reliably expect, and something that's not tied to your database structure.
Yeah,
So
that's huge. Like
that's
that like the contracts, establishing contracts and like consistent interfaces between different parts. You've already kind of touched on like wanting to go like microservice-y, all that. Like that's gonna work out great for you because you have already talked about how you have different Drupal services coming from different things. As long as you can, those can continue to be whatever they're gonna be, as long as their interfaces are consistent. Like however, like the input output of whatever module is stays consistent, like they can do individually whatever you want, and your view layer can also do whatever you want. Like VIEW, your web app layer can do whatever it wants. Like its interface is going to be like makes an API call, the response comes back. It can even like map out that response to whatever is relevant within your own app. But the point is like consistency between the communication, and then map to whatever your needs are specifically. Like you can drop a whole bunch of fields from an API response. If you don't need it, you can just save some memory and just like, when you get response, map it out to your Vuex store as you need it to be.
right. So this sounds actually like an argument in favor of GraphQL instead of REST if you're wanting to make succinct contracts. Like just give me the thing I want, not all the extraneous bits. Is that what you were saying, James, or am I going too far?
I think it's kind of different. This is more about GraphQL design. When you talk about GraphQL, even when you make GraphQL endpoints, you will want to build it against a particular API interface, then rather than directly connecting to the DB and using database schema. Basically, GraphQL is like a layer on top of all your API endpoints that like kind of comes back, right? So like basically, before the JAMstack or like SPAs, with MVC, you pretty much threw your entire model, or you access the model directly from your views, meaning like you had access to whatever it was going to be. But like now that like that connection is no longer there, and you need to interface an API, and
okay,
like,
I get it now. Yeah.
So the nice thing with Gritsum, since it's already using GraphQL, it makes it really easy to make those queries and kind of just get exactly what you want for your page and stuff like that. Like the pagination stuff works really well. Even getting information for tags and stuff like that, it all just does its thing. So yeah. But regarding unlearning, I'd say the biggest thing was that because I'm not necessarily a front-end person, like one of the big things that I had to do with coming from Drupal was that Drupal provided all of these templates for me as part of its thing that had all of the stuff that's there for accessibility and all of that stuff. So I kind of had to write all of that stuff up on my own, and like kind of looking at some of the stuff that Drupal does for providing good accessibility for the web, and having that as part of my view templates and things like that. Just so it's like, okay, this is how you do something that's invisible but still indexable by in a search engine and stuff like that, or viewable by someone that's blind or all of that sort of stuff. So that was probably the biggest challenge for me for some of that stuff. Like a lot of the stuff that I took for granted in Drupal, I have to re-implement for.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, would a good design system from a design firm mitigate some of that?
If they specialize in accessibility, maybe.
Yes, well, so that's one of the criteria for search, is that because UCLA is pretty big on accessibility.
Right.
So if the design firm knows going in, they have to build something accessible, and they give us like some Figma files that already have the CSS, would we be able to expect that
CSS isn't enough.
Yeah.
Accessibility is an HTML thing. Like people think that HTML is a lot easier than it is, and it's not. Like you have to understand when you would use an article, section, H1, nav, footer. Like these are all HTML semantic things.
Yeah.
And like CSS is a different layer. That's just your styling layer. Like a well-structured document, which is going to be pretty necessary for accessibility, as well as being able to do things like alt tags on your images and like keyboard navigation. None of that is CSS. Like a design firm won't give that to you. You need a front end developer who knows accessibility.
I feel like that'd be a major legal thing for something like UCLA.
I'm a bit of a front end developer, by the way. That's kind of what I do. I'm sort of I worked with WAMP and MERN stacks as a full stack. I've written like private little CMSs where you just store a little bit of data and like update your personal page, but it's all in MySQL. I've never worked on a huge project. Well, I just wanted to say that because I'm meeting you guys all for the first time. You don't know anything about me. I'm smoking cigarettes and eating food. Anyway.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
Anyway, yeah, I was going to say that's probably obviously a huge important thing for something like a UCLA, accessibility and just in terms of legality, etc. So something that's just doing that without you even knowing out of the box. I mean, that just seems like a tremendous amount of work you don't even realize it's doing. That's whether it's Drupal or something else, just seems like that'd be a pretty critical part.
That was a big part, and then like meta tags and stuff like that. Like just all there are modules in Drupal that just do this stuff and just kind of take care of SEO related stuff for you. And so it's like, okay, I'm kind of rebuilding this layer that I have never had to touch before. So it's just stuff to think about.
Right. Also for accessibility, I think if you want to look into frameworks, I would be very careful with what kind of tags, HTML tags the frameworks are putting and spitting into the page, because a lot of it may not be accessible, and worse than that, like in Drupal, it would be very, very hard to remove. So I suggest if you narrow it down on a few, run some accessibility test on them with some dummy database or something like that, and just to see if it passes vanilla. And then on development, you can keep tabs on that and see where you're at. Otherwise, trying to do it at the very end of a build, it's pretty difficult.
Okay.
And sometimes Uzi also
Josh,
a lot of time.
Sorry, this is Tinu. Hi, this is Tinu. Sorry.
There you go.
So talking about UI frameworks with accessibility capabilities, we're mostly familiar with Bootstrap. That's what we've been using, but we're open to trying other frameworks. Are those that you might be able to suggest that we explore outside of Bootstrap, which is what we typically use or have used?
I can jump in with a couple ideas. So if you're in Vue, first of all, there's a bunch of other, again, I just want to make sure that for the people who are a little bit more beginner, like that there's a mental distinction, as a little bit what Joe was bringing up a minute ago too, between a front end framework, which is a full JavaScript framework, and CSS frameworks a la Bootstrap. So other good examples might be Bulma. What's the Vue plugin version of that called? Vuefy, thank you. So basically in Vue, they all have kind of like, there's kind of like already a pre-built out Bootstrap version of it. And then there's, aside from the Bootstrap or Bulma versions, are there other ones like that, guys, that you might, or gals, that you might recommend?
Vuetify is a material design based one, and it's pretty robust.
Thank you. Material design. Aside from that, there's also kind of like this whole other kind of like new paradigm for CSS frameworks, which are one of them called Tailwind, another one's called Tachyon. So Tailwind's probably the main one, which is kind of like gives you the ability to kind of create your own more completely bespoke components. But it sounds like what you're looking for, Tinu, is something more like a Bootstrap that just doesn't look like Bootstrap. because everything looks like Bootstrap now. And the other option that everything looks like on mobile is material design. So kind of like the third option out there, I would check out Bulma, or, and then kind of the Vue version of that, which John just said a second ago is called which one again?
Uvi.
Uvi.
There's also, if you want
different
something,
to you. Go ahead.
if you want something that's heavier but also provides a lot of functionality, the stuff like Zerp Foundation. Not everyone likes it just because it can get pretty heavy, but it's definitely something that you can at least take a look at and evaluate and see if you like it, kind of thing. Yeah.
I was going to add one other thing about unlearning, which is most of the answers were pretty full stack oriented, but just like if you have developers that have been doing just tons of JavaScript for years, I find that, especially like when I'm working with people who are, it's almost easier for somebody who isn't like a hardcore, like old school JavaScript developer to learn something like a Vue, because you're not constantly thinking about DOM manipulation. And the concept of that is something that like you have to unlearn as a JavaScript developer. Like you just completely don't code in those, and you don't think about that anymore. And it's such a fallback for anybody who like lived in like the jQuery world and, just kind of vanilla JavaScript, if you will. You just don't think in those terms anymore on for the vast majority of the time. And so like, it's almost harder for somebody who like has historically been a JavaScript developer to like then learn to unlearn that than it is. You're almost like luckier to just like learn Vue, and it's just so easy that you don't have to like go into these old patterns.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I actually forgot about that. I would say that is the biggest hurdle. Like the whole
Yeah, I remember when I was first learning React and just being like, all I want to do is put this class on this thing when you click on it. And it's like, no, you're like conceptually thinking of it wrong. Like, don't worry about that. Think about the data and changing the data, and that will flow through your JSX, or in the case of Vue, flow through into your template. You don't have to worry about swapping something. Like, if will do that for you.
Because I've never used Vue in that sense, is Vue much more like than React rather than old school JavaScript? Okay, yes. Cool.
Yeah, you can think of Vue as basically either comparable to either JavaScript or Angular.
The nicer version.
I use React and Redux, but I really want to get into Vue. I'm a terrible designer. Like I will spend a whole year on a button because I can't decide on how it should look. It's awful. Anyway, so I need something.
Well, when Tino designs them all in Bulma, she can share them with you.
Kind of along this, when we're talking about this transition, the other big thing to get over, like from the jQuery to reactive frameworks, is how you actually, like when you're building out your CSS, how you conceptualize that. You want to be thinking, it's not like traditionally you think like HTML, CSS, JavaScript is these kind of like layers on an onion, but in component-based frameworks, it's actually more vertical. So like a button is a singular thing, especially in Vue, it's a single file component. Your styles, your behavior, and your markup for a button should live together. And like I'm a strong advocate of using scope styles in Vue so that you don't have to worry about kind of like global styles and namespacing. Like your Vue will scope your styles and namespace them specifically to that component. And you just need to worry about styling that component and reusing that component so that you don't, rather than reusing a CSS class name.
Is that done like in a local state or like a local for the Vue component, say?
Yeah,
like
it's basically, it's a baked in functionality similar to React styled components if you use that, or styled JSX if you use that in React. But the yeah, it's a way to write CSS specifically for that component without having to worry about the global namespace. You can still write stuff in the global namespace, and that's where, like, I'm a big fan of Tailwind, where you have a bunch of global utility classes. But
that's what I forgot the term.
But it, like, when you actually compose a button, like you'll make a button component that has all the styles relevant for the button itself, and then like you don't have to worry about that button class actually accidentally clashing with another thing. Another thing that I like to point, like when I write CSS, is the component is responsible for styling itself. The parent that imports that component is responsible for the layout of those things. So if I have a list of buttons, the button component has like background red, color white, whatever. And then the parent component that has the list of buttons has the margin or position or whatever it is that will position the sibling child components.
Do you know
this
if
is a big one, by the way? That's a really big one for anybody who's like looking to build something right now in Vue. Like, listen to that of what John just said, because it's such a like once you think about it, it's like so clarifying as to like how you organize, kind of like where you put your CSS, components versus, again, like a button you might want to color stylize, let's say on the inside as being red, but its position and margin, etc. You'd want to style from outside of that component. That's a huge important concept to remember where to put which CSS which, because I know I made the mistake of not thinking of it that way, and it's really
you might use the global CSS for like color constants and stuff like that, especially for like UCLA if they have to have like specific style guide related stuff for that kind of thing. So you can do a mix that way. That stuff.
And the utility CSS frameworks, a la the Tailwind, they're like they came up separately, but they just like marry so well into if you're going to write your own components into something like a Vue.js, that I would really think about checking that one out too. Again, versus like a Bootstrap, which just gives you all the buttons. This is going to just be like it gives you an ability to use their classes in a very clean way, but that like kind of fit very well within that workflow. And that's a whole different conversation. You can look at John's other talks for those, which are all on our YouTube channel.
All right. So first of all, thank you guys. Those were some really good answers to that question. However, that was only my first question and we're already 48 minutes in. So this is good, but I think I'll skip a couple.
Why don't you don't skip too many. Why don't we say you have till about 15 after? So give yourself enough time to kind of ask questions within that, and then we'll go to the next talk.
This is a good time to also plug our Slack channel. If anybody on here is, not on the Slack yet, definitely check out Vue.jsla.com to get into the Slack channel, and you can ask more questions there.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing we were thinking about with Vue is this component-based thing. You're composing things together, and if we adopt a headless CMS, then we can change our data model to be a little more granular, and then take those content types and compose them into bigger structures on a page or whatever. So what I'm actually curious about is, where do you handle some of that composition? Do you do all of the composition in the front end framework? Just give me all these little pieces out of the CMS and I will figure out in the front end how to combine them? Or do you actually take some of those content types in your backend CMS and combine them into bigger content types? Right. So I assume there's like a balance where you do some of it on the back and some on the front, but I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about this, since this is new to us.
So, sorry, go ahead.
I was just trying to follow the question a bit more. That's all.
Okay. So in the CMS, you can create essentially some type of element. It would be called a content type in the back end, right? And then you can take those and combine them into a larger content type where you like, this is a page and it's composed of all these other little content types I already created, right? So you could keep doing that until you get like an entire chunk, so that your front end just says, okay, give me that chunk and I'm just gonna render it. Or you say, okay, I leave things in smaller pieces in the CMS, and then the front end framework says, okay, to build this type of page, I'm gonna call these 3 or 4 different pieces from the back end and combine them together.
That's how I've approached. Maybe John has a different answer, but that's how I've tended to approach it. I think of it of the content model, and then like what makes sense for someone to enter, like, and constitute that as all of the data for the model. And then in the front end, if I need to stitch together stuff, then I do it that way. But it's just for separation in my head, like, okay, this article type is going to consist of a a title, a body, maybe some tags or something like that, and maybe some files. And then there might be comments, and I think of them separately in that way, because there's a comment content model, and then there's the article content model to put together into a page. And same with tags. Like tags might be its own content model that has its own structured data for stuff. So,
but does that mean in your CMS that you don't have an article content type that already has all those things as parts of it?
It does. So like it'll have files and stuff like that. And then there are ways within GraphQL to be able to basically, get me the tags and then get me its name and all of that stuff within Gridsome and its GraphQL. And it also has a way to be able to, now that I have the article, I can get the tags and then I can get associated articles with those tags. So if I want to show like related articles or something, you can, GraphQL gives you the power to be able to kind of recursively go back into finding information about other articles. So that's how you kind of play around with that. But again, the core idea is like you can think of these as separate content models. And especially if you're dealing with Drupal, like once you're getting into how it exposes the data through JSON API and GraphQL, you'll get a better idea of how it's doing everything and whatnot. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
John, did you have a different take?
No, I think, I think a lot of what he said was good. I think generally how I like to think about things is like some kind of content model that's going to be reused across the different places or can be distinct from something else is like, should probably be its kind of own store module or like its own kind of concept. It doesn't like whatever, again, like kind of getting back to that idea of like whatever the interfaces are should be consistent, like, but internally you can call it whatever you want, like whatever the model from the headless that lives within the headless CMS is doesn't necessarily need to be the model that you need within your web app. So with that, I generally like to think of things atomically, and if like it's kind of okay to hit up several different APIs to compose one page, just because then like you're decoupling your UI from your data model. Like for example, like we have let's say you have a gallery page that has like 12 different results for books. What do you need on that? Well, you need the books, so that would be one endpoint, right? But you also need the kind of text around it, like welcome to my gallery page or whatever. You can either hard code that in, which you probably don't want to, because I imagine that you have like multilingual and want somebody to be able to go in to edit that easily without changing the code. So there would be another kind of like pages data model that could just like have a title, meta description, whatever like is common amongst pages. When I did this for a previous organization, we had like a pages content model that was basically that like title, description, meta title, meta image, and then like open block of JSON that you could just kind of put whatever you want into, because often we didn't know what else needed to go into a page, because and we were just making stuff all the time, so we couldn't really guess that. So a blob of JSON was usually useful for us to put in arbitrary stuff. But like you combine that with whatever else you're trying to display on there, tags, books, media items, whatever. So, and then you just call from different API endpoints.
Okay. All right, I'll move into some more Vue specific questions now. So one thing we were thinking about are kind of like, so you've got single file components, right? Which seem to be kind of like the better way to go, but I'm curious, are they really always the best way to go? Are there situations where building components in a different way is better? Can you guys talk at all about that?
As a non-front-end person, having them split up into files was just easier to understand for me, because then I knew like, okay, like when I have a a preview version of my content, okay, it has its own file with its own rules and it does its thing. If I have a full version of it, it has its own file with its own rules and does its own thing. Like I didn't have conditional logic in my stuff for that kind of thing, or I tried to avoid it where I could, because again, it's like I can deal with the back end fine, but front end, my head just kind of spins with some of this stuff. And so that's why it was just easier for me to approach it that way. But again, like if you have someone that, oh, go ahead.
No, sorry. When you say separate files, you mean separate HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files?
No, I mean like when I'm making my component, like if I have my teaser component, that is a teaser component and not a, like an article component that has conditional, like if I'm dealing with a preview version, have this set of elements.
I think you're actually talking about the same thing here.
Yeah.
Like a single file component in Vue would be like button.view has a template, script, and style block, versus
Right.
in React where you'd have button / index.js / button.css / like you'd break up your
no, I mean, I kept the component logic all in one thing, but like I thought it was referring to like if I have an article preview versus an article full versus an article component for like the search page or things like that. Like if you're going into that kind of granularity, it was just easier for me to split them up into separate component, like a article search component, an article teaser component, and a full component and stuff like that.
So I think you're advocating basically that you have like granular components, but you're still saying that using a .view file, which is what I was going to suggest. I thought Josh was asking whether or not we should have something other than like .view files.
Yeah, I read a blog post about the different ways to create components, and the guy was listing out 3, or he actually did 4 different ways. But single file seemed like the most straightforward and the best, and I was just curious if anybody had situations where it wasn't. Like
single file is definitely like that's the main paradigm in Vue of how to actually reason about things. But that said, there's different types of components that you should be thinking of. Like there's purely presentational components. In React, you'd call them dumb components. Like they don't really deal, they take in props and they render, they render some kind of UI, and maybe they'll emit events. Beyond that though, they're really portable. They don't really do much logic, right? Like props in, render a component, maybe it emits an event. And then like
just a function that spits out the component, right, with all the data in it.
I'm sorry.
Component.
Yeah, like
a dumb React component.
Yeah, like it's not. It might have like some limited local state, but like mostly it's just props in, and maybe it emits an event. Then there's like, you can think of kind of like components that are like kind of wrapping components that don't actually create any UI, but they pass down props. So like this would be really useful for like a data layer component. Like I have a wrapping component that all it has is like a slot, and it passes props down, and it handles the logic of like fetching a blog post from the API. So like it encapsulates like on created fetch API call, and then like set the state of is loading to true, fetch API call, set state is loading to false, set data to the result, and then pass the data and loading state down as props to the child component, the presentational component. That way the stuff can look like whatever it is, but like if you're grabbing the data, you can reuse that wrapping component around. That's kind of the current way, but another thing to consider is in Vue 3, which is out now-ish, you can also do that kind of like logic encapsulation via the composition API. Either way works. I've mostly done because like Vue 3 is now new and like bleeding edge, but I've done a lot of like the compositional components that don't produce UI, just wrap and pass down props. And then like there's also like page level components that kind of like lay all this stuff out together.
I just want to, so just to make sure that was all together very clear that all of us are kind of assuming that these are all .vue files and everything we just said. So you can go back and listen to John again. But just so there's no there's no confusion. We weren't the kind of the only option in our mind. We're just like thinking is like the default is these are all .vue files that have essentially like 3 different chunks to them, right? The template, JavaScript, CSS. That's kind of what the file looks like. And some of the and even when Ashok was talking about it, he was talking. I'm pointing at different squares, which don't mean anything to you guys. That was just like another way to organize like kind of like components within components just organizationally. And what John just said is even another way is like imagine that instead of having like one component that like call it somewhere goes and does async, like goes and gets data and then uses those 3 sections to lay out that data, you may want to do something where you kind of have like a component within a component where, you know, kind of like there's like almost like a parent component that just like sucks in the data. And then as a child, will then, you know, kind of pass that in, but it's still those 3 sections. It just these are different ways to organize these components, but we're all still just like thinking exclusively in .vue files, which have those 3 chunks in them, essentially. So anyway, listen to the stuff John talked about in terms of other ways to organize those together.
So to share the data between all of these, so say it was like a view index, a view page where you showed one work and you want to have an index page of all the things. And it's all sharing the same data, just reorganizing it. You have to use the Vuex store. I mean, the Vuex, or like that's what Kobe was suggesting.
So if there's a bunch of data and there's so we're assuming there's a bunch of different components that are all working together, instead of those, I mean, this is being very broad, but instead of like, let's say you had 50 different components, right? You've got a bunch of different buttons and nav bars and all sorts of stuff. At some point, they all have data that's being shared. Instead of that all in a crazy complicated way getting passed all through props and emitted back up to each other, etc. At some point, you just have they use the Vuex store, which like that can go get your data from the server. And then all those components just have access to it, as opposed to, let's say, and again, this is, I'm being relatively, you know, broad here, but like you imagine that if you had to get like a separate GET request for like every button to like just get like the name of that button, if you wanted to be dynamically named. So like as opposed to just having a lot of that information, you know, in the Vuex store, which is then grabbing all the data, and then all those components have access to the information that it's being stored kind of like in one central place in your front end. So that's what the store is for.
It sounds to me, like Vue then is sort of a CMS type software project that uses Redux and TypeScript for the templates. Is that right?
No, it's a direct competitor to React, and Vuex is a direct competitor to Redux.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's much like setting up a project with React and Redux and TypeScript, but it's a totally different actual architecture.
Exactly, but it's like I just like to think of it as React on easy mode. It's much easier to read. But if you want to, and again, Redux and Vuex, you can think of those as exactly equal, just in 2 different ecosystems. I'm looking at the time.
I'm getting a lot of really like interesting ideas for what you guys are talking about. Thank you.
Yeah. So maybe 10 more minutes.
Yeah. So
okay.
Yeah.
All right. So search is obviously a big use case for the library. You know, people come here to search for stuff. So I'm curious if anyone here can speak to using Vue with a backend search engine like Elastic or Solar, or even Algolia. I don't think we'll ever use Algolia. They're pretty pricey for us.
I never put it into production, but I did integrate Algolia at one point. And you know, it's a very straightforward thing. The complicated part is more about keeping Algolia in sync with the right updates going on. but the interface to Algolia and rendering the new results into your screen, very straightforward.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think similar with Elasticsearch, it's not that difficult. If you get your data from Drupal getting stored into Elasticsearch, that'll make your life easy. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I guess that was an easy question then, or the answer is it's easy. Let's see. Okay. Oh, okay. So stuff like Webpack is also new to us since we do mostly server-side stuff, and I know like there's been so many changes over the past 10 years in all of this tooling. So I'm curious, what do you all use for this kind of bundling or packaging and delivery? Is Webpack the thing and the only thing at the moment? What else should we be aware of?
It's not the only thing, but it's the de facto at this point. I mean, rollup would be probably the other one, but that's more for rolling up individual modules. But like Webpack will do you. And the nice thing about Nuxt and Gridsome and even the like Vue CLI kind of just vanilla Vue project, all of that has been configured for you, so you don't need to worry about it that much.
Okay.
And when you do need to worry about it, hopefully there will be a Stack Overflow question for you to address. But yeah.
A year and a half ago and before that, this was like a major concern, and like everybody's kind of just done it all in Webpack, and again, like it's pretty much like the tools are all baked around it at this point, and so much of the stuff we used to worry about a whole 18 months ago, like we have to worry about way less now.
Don't close your eyes for a minute.
Yeah, fair enough.
Well, since there are only a few more minutes, I'm wondering if I should kind of like back up and see if anybody else has questions they want to ask before I continue on with my list. No?
From the team, I assume you meant.
Well, so the team and I worked on my list of questions together. I was curious if anybody not on my team had questions they wanted to ask.
And you can probably go another 10 minutes if you've got more questions in there. No pressure, but I just
yeah.
If you feel like you've
got like some of these we've already kind of touched on. So like I have a question here, like is GraphQL worth the effort of adoption? If so, could we adopt it later? Could we like build our site now just using our REST APIs and like add in the GraphQL later? Or would that be a pain in the ass? Like should we just type in the GraphQL now?
If you're going with Gridsome, just learn GraphQL. It's honestly, I found it pretty easy, and yeah, I loved it. There's no reason to, if you can understand it with Gridsome, then don't make your life difficult. Is all I have to say. But I mean, then if you're going with Nuxt or something, then maybe it has its way of dealing with this stuff. And
yeah, you can. Yeah. I mean, with Nuxt, you can always import the Apollo client. That's kind of the de facto way to deal with GraphQL, and you can also alongside that continue to use REST and Axios. But I can't speak too much on this though because I haven't built anything in GraphQL. But I imagine it's not too crazy to kind of put it in.
The thing is that with like Gridsome, and the plugin is already there. Like it just puts everything into GraphQL, so all you have to do is query it at the end of it. So like that's why it's like, okay, if I learn how GraphQL works, and honestly, it was maybe a few days of research and just understanding like pagination and it's specifically just some of the Drupalisms of how to, get related content and stuff like that. Once you get past that, it's pretty easy. So
yeah, I would say like with GraphQL, GraphQL was made for front-end engineers. So like if you're thinking from a front-end perspective and you already have a GraphQL endpoint to consume, I think it's probably the right choice, right? So I would say it depends on which backend API you're going to be working with and if it already has GraphQL out of the box. Because if it doesn't, stitching together a GraphQL like endpoint just can be a long project on its own. And there's a lot of like gotchas that you would have to think about going down that path.
Okay.
The GraphQL thing kind of leads us into Uzi's talk, and he's going to show us a little bit of GraphQL, especially like some really basic stuff for people to catch up. But I do actually want to ask another question about it, just general, especially for the developers in the room who've been around kind of longer than me. Is like, what are your thoughts on GraphQL's like, you know, I mean, like some of these like trends come and kind of like fade. I mean, I think of it as kind of, it's not a small trend, but it's like still something, call it in my mind, more along the lines of like a NoSQL database, where like maybe that's a little bit less cool 5 years from now. And now like, are you potentially like stuck with something that people use, but like, I mean, it's still not going to be, you know, something that's been around for decades, right? So like, you know, is that another factor that you'd put in terms of like making that decision or not? Maybe it becomes a new good thing and everybody is just using it, but I'm asking, I'm throwing the question out to people who have more experience than me.
For me, like they solve different problems. Like GraphQL is honestly stupid easy to use. Once you start using it, it's like, it's amazing from a developer perspective. It's like, oh, I put in this thing and I get exactly what I want. Great. That's the end of that. But as a backend person, if you're maintaining some of that stuff, it can suck ass just because it's like, okay, and I'm going to give this from when I talked to people at Netflix, like they were moving over to GraphQL. And like one of the biggest challenges they faced is that because a GraphQL endpoint, you're technically sending post requests to that thing, like it's not really going to be cached, but like they had to do a lot of heavy modification to like cache certain queries that were coming in and all of that stuff. But again, this is like Netflix scale, right? It's like, if I'm a little site that's maybe getting a few thousand or maybe even a few 100,000 requests a day, that's nothing compared to something that's getting 1 billion or 1 trillion requests a day that has to solve this kind of situation, right? It's like, I'm not building the next Facebook and I'm not building the next Netflix. So like GraphQL and exposing that to like other developers and stuff might be perfectly fine. If I have to worry about that stuff, then maybe I can look at like RESTful endpoints and things like that, where I can utilize more caching and stuff like that. Like that just works out of the box instead of having to worry about it as a bigger thing. So like that's why it's like GraphQL is amazing. Like at my previous company, people are using it. I think at my current company, people are starting to use that as well for some internal stuff. But like the biggest thing was just okay, I can't really cache it just because it's going to this global endpoint and it's a post request. And like, there's just a lot of heavy stuff that you have to do behind the scenes to accommodate for that. So 2 different ways to think about it, but that's me.
Does the data just slot right in and it's the same in GraphQL? Like if you already have it?
No, because like you can think of it this way. Like let's say you have multiple pieces, or you have one piece of content and there's a lot of stuff related to it. And you do a GraphQL query that's getting just specific pieces of those components. The backend is making the necessary queries, stitching that together and sending it to the front end. So as a front end developer, it's like, hey, I don't have to really worry about any of these relationships and putting it together and all of that stuff. Like it's just kind of done automatically behind the scenes. But behind the scenes is like, okay, a backend developer is going to have to worry about, okay, how performant is it and all of that, all of the stuff that goes with that. But like, yeah, from a front end, it's like, oh, give me the name and the file name from this thing. Oh, it did it. All right, I'm done. And do the happy dance. So yeah.
All right, I'd like to squeeze in one more.
Yeah, I want you to keep going. No, honestly, I want you to keep going. But I just like, honestly, this is like a perfect like dovetail into Uzi's going to show us like some very like beginner level. We've had GraphQL talks before, but not like really like this is, you know, a couple examples of like real beginners. So stick around for the next talk unless I feel like I'm advertising it. I don't have to, but I'm just saying. Like, Uzi's gonna like show us some like, this is how to use GraphQL for an absolute beginner in like 5-10 minutes here. So keep going, Josh, and then.
All right, I'll ask one more. Let's talk about testing, right? So what tools do you use for testing? Yeah. Nothing, huh? Nobody's testing.
A keyboard.
Yeah. So there's a few different layers of tests, right? So you've got your unit tests and integration tests, and then you've got your end-to-end tests, and you probably also want some visual regression tests in there as well. So from the unit and integration test standpoint, Jest, created by Facebook for React, but works just fine in Vue. Jest is great, and you are also going to want to check out the Vue at Vue/test-utils package, which gives you just like some helper utilities to kind of just mount your components and be able to run tests on them. And this is where, like, getting back to like my point about kind of like components, dumb components that like take props and output UI, really easy to test those. So like the dumber you can make most of your components, the more tests and easier tests you get to write. Like, built a component library for Bambi where I am right now, and we've got like 95% test coverage because I just forgot to write a couple tests. But like, really easy to write UI unit tests. Similar with integration tests and like tests around your store. Lots of like, the more functional you can make stuff too, like the easier it is to test stuff, because you can just export a function and then just test for results from that.
What about Cypress?
Yeah, so that's the other half. So end-to-end testing, it's going to be a lot heavier and slower, but Cypress is awesome for it. I'm a big fan of it. That's my like usual recommendation for that is like, start writing with your critical tests for your critical paths for end-to-end tests, stuff that like you want to make sure will not fail. And then after that, you can worry about your kind of like edge cases and stuff. Cypress coupled with some kind of visual regression testing. What was that thing I was looking at?
We have Percy here.
Okay. Yeah, Amplitool was one that I heard about just recently also, which is like, it's visual regression testing matched with machine seeing, so that like little pixel differences, or like maybe a snapshot was taken when like your text cursor was blinking, and like another snapshot was taken where it was gone, that would fail traditionally under like a pixel matched visual snapshot thing. Amplitool does machine learning or machine seeing, so it can.
How do you spell that?
Applitools. Like application tools, Applitools. I haven't tried it, but I saw a demo and I was like, that's awesome. So that's one thing I want to check out at some point. But yeah, that would be your like, end-to-end tests are slow though. So that's one of those, however your like CI/CD pipeline is going to be, write lots of unit tests and write a bunch of like structural snapshot tests. So that's where it just like takes you, like one of your unit tests for UI components is just a snapshot of HTML. If the HTML doesn't change, then that's good, right? Like that's you want to be intentional about HTML changing. So, and those are pretty easy to write. It's the visual stuff running a browser that's going to be a lot slower. So you're going to write fewer of those.
What would take a snapshot of the HTML?
Oh, a Jest will do that for you.
So there's a cool tool that I found out about recently called BuildKite, and
called what? Sorry, Ashok?
It's called BuildKite
Okay.
for CI/CD related stuff. And what you can do is you can give it like a wildcard, and you can have it spin up like basically instances and test against each of those files individually. So like, let's say, you have 100 different files with maybe 100 test cases each or whatever, and it might take an hour or 2 hours to run it. With BuildKite, because of the way it's pattern or wildcarding and then spinning up additional services stuff runs, you could have like 30 or 40 agents running across the suite of the 100 or 200 files and its tests, and like you could be done in 5 minutes in that kind of scenario. I just found out of it from work because we use it for a test suite that takes 10 plus hours to run, that runs in 20 minutes. So it's fast. And
our test took a long time.
And then for regression testing, like you said, there's Applitools. And a long time ago, I used something called Wraith, which is a Rails-based one, which uses ImageMagick to do snapshots and all of that sort of stuff. So that's something that you can host on your own to test out for regression testing and stuff like that. And I think there's another one in Node.js that I'm trying to remember the name of for doing similar kinds of stuff. If you want to host it yourself.
I just want to mention that there's a few things we've mentioned just kind of in passing that are just like keywords. I want you to, if you're going to be thinking about the ecosystem, that I just think, I don't know if there are equivalents in other ecosystems, but like the Vue CLI tool is going to be so helpful with this stuff, right? So I mean, like they've got these, it has got a built-in plugin system that if you want to add testing, I mean, I don't know exactly what the actual command is, but if you're using the Vue CLI, if you're starting up your app that way, and it sets up your config for you, and then it's basically like Vue add Cypress or whatever the Vue CLI add Cypress kind of commands, and it just like integrated. It's just there versus like all the stuff you're concerned about with like setup. If you think about the CLI in the outset, a lot of that stuff will just be so much easier for you to just like throw in and try. And while we're at it, other tools that are just like super important is the in the browser, there's dev tools, super critical. Are there other tools in there that I'm not thinking about right now? I mean, you can see the Vuex state in your browser is really, really nice when you've got the Vue Dev Tools plugin in your browser. I mean, it's just so nice to work with it that you just like take, if you're in other ecosystems when they don't have it, like I just know how people code. What are the other tools, anybody else that you might want to, that are like just like important to our ecosystem that might be important for them to know about?
I'm a big fan of, I mean, like not unique to Vue, but ESLint and Prettier are like just those are the first things I install, because I want to hit save and I want things to look right and not ever have to do a code review where we talk about single quote or double quote. If you're using VS Code, Vtur, VETUR is a really great extension that'll help a lot with working with .vue files.
I was also going to mention you could look at page speed. There's a CLI for that, just to make sure that your front end is performing well, and it gives you scores for both mobile and for desktop. So at least that way you know that you're not writing completely horrible front end code or loading a whole bunch of stuff that you maybe don't need to.
And back
so
to the
page speed is like what is it?
It tests your front end basically for how fast it is.
I think there's plugins for Prettier and ESLint are like, I mean, literally you can generate an app, and that's a plugin that those are already built in, just so you know. And then that means it'll integrate into the VS Code even easier too. But again, these are just like you should check out the plugin ecosystem. The Vue utils that John talked about was really important. If you want to do the testing, that's like another, again, like these are all just like extra tools that are just given to you in the ecosystem that just make everything, all these things that are just like so much boilerplate annoying stuff getting set up are just like easy to go. I wanted to ask one last question, and really we're gonna pivot to, where did Uzi go? Oh, there he is. His little square moved. Microservices. I don't know if there's like any. I think you guys had mentioned that. I feel like there's potentially going too far in that direction, and I don't know if I'm gonna because I know that I know the person I'm alluding to here. Ashok kind of dealt with a company that had done that a little. I'll let you talk to it. How would you process microservices, Ashok?
Do you want me to get into it? I don't think you have enough time.
Give us the 30-second version, because
depends on how big your team is and stuff like that, and how much you want to split stuff up. But you can go really into the deep end, and if you stick to what microservices are, and you'll literally make a different repo for every endpoint or thing that needs to be done, it can become really unwieldy to maintain, just because it's like, okay, we have a bug. Which repo am I supposed to be looking at for this stuff? It can sometimes be difficult to test. So, just make a good judgment call on how far you want it to go. I know with Amazon, like they tend to use something called SOA or services-oriented architecture, which is not really microservices and it's not really monolithic. It's a kind of a mix in between there. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the monolith. There's nothing wrong with the microservices. One is just better built for a smaller team, and one is better built for a company that has a lot of teams. So just have to balance yourself out for where you want to go with this stuff.
Yeah,
I think continuous integration is very important on microservices because otherwise, how would you orchestrate all that?
It's important in both, but like so the ideal in what they say in microservices is that, okay, since I just deal with this one function, I'm going to have a certain set of input that's coming into it and expect a certain set of output for it. And it's all just kind of contained that way. Whereas in a larger system, you might still be doing the same thing, but it's just all integrated into all the other tests that you're doing.
Right.
So the issues start coming up when one service is going to talk to another service and maybe pass on data from that service to something else. So like if there are 100 links in between, it's like, okay, there's a broken telephone. I need to do each of those 100 links at that point.
Yeah, and I don't think we'll ever go down that road. Really we're dealing with multiple systems of record and then, a handful of other services that are ancillary to that.
Right.
So, yeah.
I just, again, these are one of those things.
Anyways,
where people talk about a new idea, everybody starts going in that direction, and then Ashok's on the other end of that, where he's actually now seeing what happens when microservices possibly go too far. So just be careful with that. All right. I think we're going to wrap up this part of the conversation. I mean, it honestly goes perfectly in Uzi's conversation. I just want to say real quick, like I specifically asked a few people to be in this room to like actually be able to answer these questions. I just want to thank everybody for showing up. And I want to thank UCLA. We wanted to do exactly this, which is like, we've been wanting to have conversations with like organizations to like really help kind of facilitate this. So I want to thank Josh and the whole team for like even suggesting this. I think this is actually a really good use of our time, even if it's not 100% talking about Vue. This is a really good use of our time, but also the people who showed up to answer those questions, because I couldn't answer them all myself. So you all know who you are, and thank you for showing up to actually answer these questions. So anyway, good job everyone. Thank you.
Hey, much appreciation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
All right, thanks guys and gals. On that note, since we've surprisingly talked a lot about GraphQL, it's a perfect segue to Uzi. Uzi's going to give us a talk on Amplify, which he's going to describe in a bit, but in particular, a lot of the focus of the talk is going to now be on GraphQL within that concept. So Uzi, it's all you. Thank you for.
Okay, so we did talk a lot about GraphQL, so I'm not really sure if this is what we should focus on or how many of you really know anything about it. It's pretty new for me, but I think I would like to start with Amplify and explain what that is and then kind of go from there. I did have a little bit of presentation, so I don't know, you want me to share my screen right now, Kobe?
Yeah, is it not allowing you? One sec. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Sure. Okay. So, okay. All right. So my name is Uzi. I've been a developer in Drupal for about 10 years or so. And currently I'm sort of switching into being a solution architect, focusing at the moment with Amazon, AWS. And Amplify is one of their sort of framework they have sort of created to help build application like Vue apps and mobile apps in a particular easier way. So a lot of us sort of been building all the new flavors, and it's a lot of fun going through the process. But then we get into deployment. And then it's like, oh my God, what kind of service should I use? Or hey, authentication, security, all that kind of stuff. If you choose a cloud provider, most likely they're going to provide you with a lot of those things. And AWS created Amplify precisely for that, which allows you to take an app, you know, any Vue app, and add a backend to it, set up an API, REST, or GraphQL, whichever one you want to use. Have an authentication, have a storage for user uploaded content, run analytics, push notification, and so on and so forth. And everything is fairly simple. So what I'd like to do today is sort of run you through a process of a few commits, starting from like a very basic app into sort of like an app that has, you know, just like a note sharing functionality, and maybe like one model for GraphQL. So the basic process, you take your app, you connect it into the backend and configure it with it. Then it needs to be sort of connected to the cloud. And then once you connect it to the cloud, you can continue to add components and UI components that they provide you fairly easy. So for these are the requisites for Amplify, Node.js, you know, NPM, certain level, and obviously an account with AWS. So this will be the first sort of installing the CLI. I'm not going to get into that today, but there's a few things here that a few slides that show you sort of how to go with it. After installing the CLI, you're going to run through a configure, which is an online screen asking you, you know, how would you like to communicate with the cloud, what your account. It allows you to set up a profile on your own computer that you can easily log in and out without having to enter your credential each time. And once you've done that, you go to the root of the application and you run Amplify init. And then you go through all those steps right here, sort of asking you what framework would you like to use. You know, Vue is not the only one. It works with Angular, it works with React, Next.js, or vanilla JavaScript. And then, so once we've done, once we configured our CLI, we sort of need to sort of set up our front end. So just let me just pull you guys real quick to show you. So this will be the app that we're going to be working with. Today, it's just like a regular app. Right now, there's nothing really going on. I have, as you can see, it's just a regular view. There's nothing in here. You know, just a simple startup app. I use Bootstrap Vue to build that one. And then let me just real quick. So we'll skip this to step 3, where we're setting up the CLI, which is including our sort of Amplify, importing it into it. And the most important part is there's a file called AWS exports, which any configuration that we will run will get stored in there and synced it automatically into our services in the cloud. So as you can see here, we already have an Amplify folder get added into here. There's a backend which stores sort of like an API. Usually you will not have the API at that stage, but I kind of, one of my branches got sort of messed up a little bit. So there's more information here that needs to be. So let's go to the next one. That would be sort of adding the API. So some of the requirement, obviously, you know, we need to list all the nodes, and we want to have CRUD functionality. GraphQL with Amplify provide you create your CRUD functionality out of the box. You don't have to deal with any of that, and provide the method that you need, you know, for you to run them. It comes sort of with DynamoDB, which is a NoSQL database. And CloudFormation is the engine, is a templating engine that you use to create resources on a cloud that you can later on version control it and deploy it again if you just need something to deploy for a particular amount of time and then shut it down. Obviously GraphQL and any of their directive for that database. So then, in order to connect the front end into the API, we sort of need to add our mutation. Oops, sorry. I lost it for a second.
There you
go. Okay, so we set up the front end, and we want to see the mutation. Okay, so right now this is already, there's a little bit more added in here. Can anybody see do you need to go a little larger, or is it clear enough?
go a little bit larger.
Okay.
There you go.
All right, so, okay, so right now we have a form that actually create the notes. You know, very simple one. It has a V model name and description, and then there's a certain area where I actually grab the notes and bring it back to you and set them up in cards like Bootstrap cards. In terms of function, these are the functions that are provided by Amplify. I've just included them in here. This is creating the notes, grabbing them. There's the ability to subscribe to note in case you sort of like have multiple users and each one wants to get into that. So we put it in here and okay. So right now we already have, you know, we have our form in here. We have our notes, and it's all backed up by a database. So if I go new note, and then just add that one here, and create a new note, and new notes here. So fairly simple.
Wait, just because you're running this locally, but is it actually going to the server right now?
It's actually going to the server. This is actually gets stored on the server, and this is the environment that gets created on the server. There's a front end and a back end. So if I go into so this is the actual live app. Sorry. So as you can see, each one of those are components that can be added. So we go into the API. Sorry, it's hard to see here.
So you don't have to set up.
I'm just going to pull I'm just going to pull the table. The tables get set up automatically. This is the table for the notes that got set up for us. And these are all the notes that we've created. So as you can see, this is a new note. And we can come in here and literally, you know, we can probably change. Let's see, new note. From DB, right? Sorry, the screen is so small. Okay, here you go. And then if I go back to my local, and it would be
from DB right there.
I know, it's just those thumbnails. I take it all. Yeah.
Oh, we can see it right there. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you guys can see it, but I have all kinds of tools in here that I need to just find a spot for them so I can see it myself too. Okay, so that's essentially how the app is communicating with the resources on AWS. And I think we want to jump a little bit into HQL. Let's see where that is. So this step, really we need to write up a schema. The schema is very, very simple. There's a directive called model for the node.
Just to be clear, this is the GraphQL part we're talking about now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, if anyone wants me to go back to the other one, we can do that a bit later. But I thought this is a good time to introduce how the data is being organized. We have these are the fields that we created within the schema. We have ID, name, description. Those created on the table on the DynamoDB table on the other side.
Just curious, what does the exclamation point signify?
I think it's just part of the syntax. I'm not quite sure. I noticed that here they're also sort of missing, so it could be just instead of a comma, they're using an exclamation. There's other directives that allow you to add sorting to the database as well that you can use. And then you can pick up whichever field you want it to be sorted by, or if you want to bring in particular information from the table, you can sort of create additional model that only bring you those type of information. So like, let's say, just bring me the emails of all the customers, stuff like that. I don't know if you guys want to look into the GraphQL, editor and see how the data is actually structured. This might be kind of interesting for those who haven't got a chance to introduce to that. So one of the differences.
I'm relatively new to GraphQL, but just so you guys know, this is baked into like the ecosystem. Like this is just like anybody's using GraphQL. This is like a tool that it's just like everyone. It's included and it's used. This isn't like.
Yeah, it's called Graphical, and sort of it comes with GraphQL is self-documenting. So as you're writing your data, it creates this sort of like document. So if we are on the root, it shows us all those informations of what's included in here, and then we can build our query based on that. One more thing it's kind of interesting is that even if you don't know what it is particularly looking for within the data, you can just come and create sort of like almost like a JSON object, right? And then you say, I don't know, just type any letter, and you have all those like type hints. So if I want a person, and I would put a person ID, right? And then I'll just say 3 just for kicks. And then I'll have a sub, and I want a name, right? And if I run that, see what we get. So that would be our R2D2. So it's very easy to sort of.
I just want to clarify if that was misunderstood, how easy that was. This is built into the ecosystem, and basically like all the models are already in the back end. And like, let's say you didn't even know what your models were on the front end. He literally typed the P, and it gave you all the different model names that start with P. He picked person, and then he picked an I. And then basically it's a bunch of autocompletes that are just helping you out, right? So like basically it's like, oh, the next thing is give me an ID that you want. Great. He didn't have to put that in there, and then he started like in the curly braces, started typing in there. Started typing the letter N. Oh, name is clearly one of the things you can search for within a person. And it just auto completed it there, and then the second panel, the second vertical is the result that came back.
Right, and I think that the only thing we need to have is the field that we want to call for, and pass an argument and a subfield, and then we can just keep adding subfields. I can potentially add another subfield. I think there's a height, there's a hair color. And then obviously R2D2 has no hair, so you're not going to return anything in that. But for me, the biggest thing is that if we are having a front end like Vue where we just want to pull a particular information, it's very easy to build those type of functions that will return the data for us, and then if we build work together, the front end or even the back end would work with whoever write the GraphQL. You can agree on naming convention, then everything becomes a lot easier to sort of like populate and maintain. What happened when you start interacting with a lot of data? I'm sure maybe Ashok can point us to, or one of you guys can probably talk about that, but conceptually, I think this is kind of pretty cool.
I just add that it's like, go back to the sentence that James said before. Like, you can tell this was written by a bunch of front end developers. They're like, just give me the data I need. That's it. Like, that's what this is for. And so like, if you're in something like a Vue, it's very clear that like, oh, I'm whatever part of the page I'm on, I need a person, and like, give me their name, their height, and hair color. That's all the information I need. Give it to me, and that's it. I don't know how much code goes in the back end. That's a different conversation, but you can see how easy it is for a front end developer to use this tool and make something like front end development easy.
Right, like, and going back to here, like this is very simple for a front end person to write, a simple model that will grab something from that database, right? So if I was connected to the Star Wars API, and I want to just grab a list of characters, I would just come here, and I can just model this structure using those fields, and it would just populate that data that way, which I think it's pretty cool.
But you would have to convert all of it to GraphQL. So if you had like tons of data that was already.
Well, I think it's how your database is structured that the GraphQL. So if you're already starting with a database that it's like populated and has a whole bunch of fields, it's probably going to be a lot harder to incorporate GraphQL into that. But if you're starting with something fresh and you know what you're going to need, this is like a nice way to bring some stuff over. I mean, throughout my search, I saw that Netflix also has an API that allows to bring songs. And I mean, I just knew that I want to search Butterfly, and then he pulled up that song for me. So it's if you structure your database, it may be easier to do on a non-relational relational database. than relational database that has a lot of joins and so forth, because that way you can just create model based on every object within the NoSQL, and then potentially have certain fields that are just like so not available.
Can I just add to like make sure that the concepts all tie together, that kind of, the way you think of things in a normal CRUD app, let's say it's Rails, if you wanted user, that like there's a bunch of there's routes that are, if you wanted user /1/edit, that's the edit one, or just user /1 gives you the show page for the user, or users gives you all of a list of users, right? Those are different routes. The way GraphQL works is it's just one endpoint. There's no like, you don't go to the /posts or /users, like you don't do any of that. There's just one endpoint, and like you basically just give it an object that kind of looks like line 47 through 51. And let's say that let's say that there's something like, instead of person, it says user, and you want the name, but you also want to know all of its comments, all that user's posts and all of its comments. You would basically just give it like as a object that is nested there. So instead of where a hair color is, you could have the word again posts, and even within post you could have comments, and it would just give you back that user with all of its posts and all the comments related to each of those posts. And like that's just the way you query. You don't have to go to do all the routing stuff that we just like think of as a default. So like again, I'm trying to tie together all the content. This is all new to me, but like that's kind of how all this stuff kind of sort of fits together.
Yeah, I think also as far as performance goes, I mean, if you had to sort of grab all the people into your app, sort through them in order to present a subset of that data, yes, you can cache it, but the initial one always gonna be costly, right? And in that way, you can actually keep all the data on the server, and then you just pull in only whatever you need or whatever users need, and then you can add caching on top of that. So it's kind of like a nice tool to fetch data into your app.
Yeah, and I think it's okay if you have relational data, because I believe you can create your own API endpoint on top of your other API endpoints, right? So something like, I think Graphene is a tool that you can use, I think, in the Python world where I come from. Like if you have a bunch of Django apps or Flask, right, then you can use something like Graphene. Let's say you want to harvest data about something that's distributed across 3 different databases and pull them into one. You can make one query to that Graphene API, and it'll make all the subsequent calls downstream to assemble the thing you want. Right.
No, I mean, I just said, I think that what I meant by NoSQL versus like relational databases, that it's a little bit easier, less complex to sort of manage the data, since you're only using, it's somewhat structured a little bit like it already on the NoSQL side. Okay, so how much more time do we have, and are there any questions?
You're going.
Okay. So I guess the last part that we haven't touched here would be, sorry. So we connected the database into and subscribe data. So we're gonna have users on the app. So if somebody put a note, they can subscribe that it would be pushed to them, or they'll be able to get notified with that. And these are some of the functions that you get sort of out of the box completely. To add with Amplify, a lot of the component of it, like authentication, is just require just this one line, and everything sort of gets created on your local machine and also in the cloud. And all you need to do then is just drop in the component into your app, and then you and it's a full workflow authentication with sort of like a email confirmation and so on and so forth. Like all of that is just completely done immediately for you.
So Amplify lets you just drop this in and you just have like AWS authentication all throughout your Vue app?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
cool.
Pretty much that. So if I am going into okay, so the authentication in this case, what I did is I did not care if sort of the jumbotron at the top of the app will be, will be visible to the whole public, and then the component, whatever you sort of wrap it, the area you wrapped in, which was the form and the notes themselves, that would be, that would be obscure, and you need to sign in order to get that. And this is pretty much included when you add Amplify into the app, and you no longer need to have, sort of like there's no method or anything else that you need. You just use the component themselves and the button that sort of like sign you out. So I go here. And I can sign out. So this is this entire component sort of come in automatically. You can sort of create a new account, get yourself a confirmation, and then you're good to go. I think this is pretty much what I wanted to show with a given amount of time that we have, but
great.
Thank you. Are any questions or anything else you guys want to see?
I'd love to just, again, are there other things in Amplify that are worth mentioning that we haven't mentioned yet?
Sorry. So other component you can use, you can add, sorry. So you can sort of add push notification into the app. You can add analytics, so you can track what users are doing within your app. You can, as I said, storage for you can add file storage for user uploads, and you can use Lambda function for basically anything else that you want to custom add into your app. Were you thinking about anything else, Kobe? Because I'm not quite sure.
No, I just want to make sure we kind of again cover. It feels to me like Amplify is like a nice basket of a bunch of AWS services, so that you can kind of just use those in a really easy way. So again, it was just nice that Uzi kind of showed us a couple of them, and just it seems like it's a pretty big ecosystem that it's kind of just like, again, AWS
right.
way of giving you like a bunch of the different stuff that they've already built out like in one easy place.
Yeah, I did not want to get into what type of services. There's a lot of services that are sort of behind under the hood. You get benefit from. Essentially, the main ones would be like the DynamoDB, the GraphQL, the S3 will be for file storage, and Cognito for a sort of user authentication. So they also within the user authentication, you can have off if someone want to have social logging to your app. So it's also included through some of their services as well. So this will be an option when you add authentication. You can choose the one that I've used here is just basically username and password, and people are authenticated via email. But you can add a user pool where you actually bring in from if you're building an app and you want to have federated users from UCLA, you can dump their credentials in there and then add that, and then they'll automatically have access with their credential into the app, which could be pretty cool for big organizations. But yeah.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Anybody, any questions? Well, thank you so much. Thanks, Uzi.
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
All right. Anyway, so I think we got like only because I happen to have known what was in Uzi's talk. This was this was Amplify, but it was also kind of like a quick beginner's overview of GraphQL, which was a thing I kind of asked him to do for us. So thank you for that.
Sure.
All right, team. We're 3 minutes over. Here, why don't we stop the sharing for now?
Yep.
All right, everyone. Another session down. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I thought it was a pretty interesting two talks. They both kind of really fit well together, so that was excellent. Thank you, Josh, and thanks, Uzi, for the talks.
Sure.
Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
And thanks, everybody, for also answering and asking all the questions. This felt like a good session, so I feel like we all really learned a lot. So thank you, everybody. All right. Anybody last thoughts, questions, anything?
We need tutors.
Oh,
sorry,
yes.
I can't
Thank
turn
you.
my video
Thank you.
on
I'm
right
glad
now.
you were, thank you for reminding me. Jen and I are working on a couple different workshops. One is one that she's been working on for years and years called Rails Girls, which is actually how I met her. And now this year, we're also doing one called Viva La Vue, which is a Vue.js workshop. And they're 2 weekend workshops that are kind of just free to like encourage women to join the web developer community. Anyway, so we are having that. So please help us spread the word. Let people know that there is you can go to railsgirls.com/LA and learn all about it. And we're also looking for coaches. So if you want to not for Rails, it's this coming weekend, but for Vue specific, which is this group, the subsequent weekend, we're doing it's like a half day workshop to like walk people through the absolute beginning of Rails. And if you have any desire to be a coach, we could totally use your help. And there's going to be a bunch of breakout sessions. So we're going to have the tutorial. We're all going to walk through it together, but it's like, I mean, if you have any experience and you feel confident, you know what, a div is and maybe a little more information than that, then you could probably help a real beginner out to just like walk through and learn a little bit about how to build a few things in Vue.js. And so if you're interested to join either as a student or as a coach, we'd love to have
I think you said Rails, but yeah, on the Saturday, the 24th is the Vue workshop.
So this coming Saturday is the Rails workshop, and the subsequent Saturday on the 24th,
right?
Yes.
Vue.js workshop. What's that?
I was answering a question from home.
Anyway, so please, we need.
And it's only from 9:30 to 2. Well, really for coaches, it's about 10 to 2:30. So it's unlike other years where it's like 9 to 6.
Yeah, we made it Zoomer
Ashok.
friendly. Anyway, so yeah, yeah, if anybody has
just
any
Friday.
that'd be great. Yeah, so we're starting off Friday, and yeah.
Ashton's gonna do it.
Awesome. Can't tell her mute here. She's muted right now. Anyway, all right, team. Thank you all so much. Thanks for reminding me, Jen. And good job, everyone. We'll see you all next month. And if anybody has any ideas for talks for next month, we don't have anything planned yet, so please feel free to shoot me an email. All right, and oh, the Vue.js LA Slack channel. If you guys want invites, I think it's just Vue.jsla.com is the site that John built, and you get a link there to the Slack channel. You can continue asking questions there.
That's cool.
All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a great
Good
night.
night.
Take care.
Bye.
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 Good night, guys. Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.